Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. And last week, or this week I should say, saw the start of the crossover with Doctor Who. Honestly, I did a couple of those relic sites and I don't know, just doesn't really fit the bill for me, even though they mentioned in the live stream that it was not going to be very rewarding and it is geared towards newer players. It just feels so grindy even for newer players. On top of that, after just one site, I think it was, I ran out of progression to really make without having to, start buying and selling stuff. I don't get it. In order to keep progressing on the progress track towards those skins. So I feel like that's a little bit of a mistake. Give everyone a track that they can keep doing on a single activity, so that at least there's constantly a feeling of progress towards completing those 900 points, I think it is. To me, again, not really an event that I'm gonna spend a lot of time in, and it just feels like it's super sluggish and not exactly fun to do at this point. But we'll see. Next up, on the development front, we don't really have a lot of news. We are halfway January, still no news on the compression coming to the game, so let's just wait and see what CCP announces. Again, my horizon is on FanFest, of course. I do think that that's where CCP is, gearing most of its planning towards at this point. So that means that we can go to and take a look at the New Eden store. What's happening here? We do have those interstellar conversions skins. They look pretty good. They get a unique animation as well, I think. Let's take a quick look at that on, for instance, the Raven. Yep, there you go. At the back, you can see they've got this unique type of animation. They're pretty cool. You can get some of them from doing the event, but other than that, I don't think there's much to report. Let's take a quick look at the services. No, nothing else to report that's special here. So let's move on straight to the market then. We'll start with Plex and stuff coming in at 225. There we go. Let's start with Plex and get a move on the chart. So you can see here basically a little bit of sideways movement, a little bit of hesitation, some pressure as well in the last couple of days, but you can see as well that we are already recovering from that. So for GTA itself, we are selling just above 2.9 million. Buyers are coming in at more than 2.7 million. Pretty normal margin, I would say. Do we go down? Well, a little bit of pressure from the Tranquility Trading Tower, but it's 1,000 disc, so really not much change. We're still above 2.9, and then the buyers, are they more aggressive? Not exactly. There's just more buy orders in the same range. So that's really something that has changed, I think, with the new tax changes, where I think you can still get a slight advantage in the Tranquility Trading Tower as long as you don't have perfect skills, but it's now so close between buying and selling in GTA with the Tranquility Trading Tower that everything basically comes together around the same prices, at least for Plex. And then we've got the multiple pilot train certificates. Same story, a little bit of downward pressure after reaching 1.5 billion again, but at the tail end already making its way back up. So we are talking almost 1.5 billion for the sellers, almost 1.4 billion for the buyers. Pretty expensive as well at the moment, and availability is not that great. Of course, it is less versatile than Plex, so I think most people would go for Plex rather than the training certificate, especially at these prices. These skill extractors should show something similar to Plex as well. Yeah, you can see here on those daily averages where we touched that 330 million mark, and then we basically recover to stay flat for the last couple of weeks, despite the fact that we do have a couple of volume spikes here going well above 2,500 traded in a day. We are talking 330 million for the sellers, 322 million for the buyers, so very, very close here between sellers and buyers, and a slight domination from the Tranquility Trading Tower on the top sellers, but the difference 329.9 to 331.3 is very, very, very narrow yet again. So the impact on the skill injectors, here are the large skill injectors, continuing to decline a little bit, although there are some daily prices that don't really want to go below 650 million on some days. I think buyers are winning out, and then it's happening. Yep, 653 million for the sellers, 616 million for the buyers. That's a pretty sizable margin that has opened up here between sellers and buyers, showing hesitation for those sellers to really, let go of that 650 million price mark, but there's just not a lot of demand, and those buyers are definitely opening up that gap that is putting pressure on the large scale injectors to go down. And so when you're seeing these daily averages well below 650, those are days where the buyers are basically getting most transactions, which is pretty interesting. Honestly, it would make more sense, in my opinion, to sell at those high points for plex, while the large scale injectors are actually under pressure. But it looks like there's a bit of selling pressure happening at the moment as well. Perhaps the silence on how the hell is compression going to work is part of it at this point. A little bit of speculation basically that this would drive demand for the injectors. That's not working out. A couple of investors dumping their injector investments. Could be. Let's see if the small scale injectors are showing the same thing. Yeah, actually in a more convincing way. You get that 5-day moving average going through this. I think it's the 135 million mark, but you can clearly see here that we get a seesaw movement that goes lower and lower and lower on like pretty much 4 occasions in the last couple of months. So clearly the market is hesitating as to what's going to happen for these skill injectors. 132 million now for the sellers, 123 for the buyers. That's still a pretty normal healthy margin. And so yeah, my speculation is that we reach those high points on all of that compression hype. Could mean lots of injector demand because players will have to switch to different chips and things like that. Perhaps even get some extra skill points, at the ready in order to quickly be able to use compression as well. But because we're not hearing anything after it was pulled from the December patch, I believe it was, we are starting to see lower and lower prices, which is good news if you yourself, of course, want to be ready just in case you are getting cheaper skill injectors at the moment. I would honestly say put up a buy order. You are going to grab it. Then we've got the daily alpha injector. Here the event might have a little bit of an impact, but nope, so far pretty flat, just above 40 million ISK. I think everyone ought to be pretty happy with that. 41.2 in the Tranquility Trading Tower, 41.3 in Jita. Again, those differences have almost gone down to nothing. And then we get 37 million for the buyers here, with again Tranquility Trading Tower, Jita very close to one another. I think a pretty good price spot for those alpha players that enjoy that daily goal of around 40 million ISK. And then finally we've got the Hypercore that does a bit of a counter move, in my personal opinion. If we still hold that this is perhaps a little bit of a gauge for inflation as well. We're clearly seeing an upswing very close to the 1-year high point, not yet getting there. That's 330,000 ISK, but we're well above 300,000 for the sellers, 285,000 for the buyers. It may just be that there's also a little bit more hypernet activity coming into the game, perhaps as well around the events that players are trying to dump some special stuff through the hypernets. But hypercores are pretty expensive at the moment, and one of the only items in the plex category that actually ubiquitously is going up at the moment. Let's take a look at the minerals next, coming in at 850. There we go. As always, we will start with titanium. That is, well, slowing the descent. So basically, I've got a good hope that we will not just break straight back through the 4.5 ISK barrier on the downside. We are talking, let's see, I have to get Jita prices here. 484 for the sellers, 466 for the buyers. I do think that there is hope for titanium starting to move between 4.5 and 5 ISK at the moment, which, considering the last 6 months or so, is not a bad price for titanium. I also have a quick anecdote because I have been selling a little bit in Amar in the last week, where titanium prices actually ran up to 480 plus as well on the sell side of things. I think there is, for some reason, more demand for titanium out there in the universe, and all the cheap stuff is being snagged up by someone. So that's pretty interesting. We usually had a very big difference where Amar was way cheaper than Jita, but I can confirm that just yesterday you were able to sell titanium above 480 in Amar as well. Then we've got the pyrite market. That's quite a different chart, continuing to go down. Broke through the 15 ISK, and I mentioned that I think that if you manage to break this, especially on the seller side of things, there is potentially a new range that is being found. And here we go, 1441 for the sellers and 1415 for the buyers. So if you're looking for pyrite buyers, they're just not here at the moment, and it's around 14 to 14.5, maybe 15 ISK if we're lucky at the high points. But for me, this does start to feel like, unfortunately, pyrite is being oversupplied and has found that new lower range. So your focus for Isaac mining, I think, is going to be titanium and perhaps Mixelon. Let's see what's happening here. Yeah, nice little plateau as well after gaining a little bit in the last couple of months. So that feels pretty good. 68 for the sellers and 66 for the buyers. That's a pretty damn narrow margin between sellers and buyers. And obviously, again, compared to the last 6 months or so, a pretty good price. Do the same for pyrite, a very bad price. So if you're mining in HiSec, I think titanium and Mexelon should be your focus. Next, we've got our low-sec minerals. Here is Isogen, still really struggling to break out of that 125, and I think new supply will bring us back down towards 100. 108 for the sellers and 103 for the buyers. And yeah, 10 million here, 30 million here, 18 more, 10 millions in the volumes here. That's quite a lot that is coming to the market here all of a sudden. But we have to be honest, on this chart, getting to 125 is another clear sell opportunity, considering this full 1 year chart. You're selling at more than double what it was about a year ago, and so I do think that here this might just be this 100 plus range, might just be a place where more old stocks are coming alive and are being brought to the market to take advantage of what's happening here. I still hold to the theory that eventually will break through the 125 barrier, and in fact, if I'm not mistaken, in Dodixie we did that because there we've got basically less supply, and it is possible that a bit of a buying spree breaks through that range already. In Jita, unfortunately, right, this is the largest trade hub in the game. There's bound to be lots of reserves that are sitting right here in the station still, and that's probably what we're seeing here. You can see that they're cutting down very quickly, right? If we try to get at 125, here's that 250 million units that is still in the wait, and that is basically, you can see that here as well, the reason why we're just not able to break through on the high side of things. But then you have these 120, 118, and then you get a 115, some more at 115, and then down here even at 108, someone willing to dump 50 million units at that price. Eventually we'll chew through that. I still believe this, but it's just going to take a little bit of time. We might have just underestimated how much Isogen is still waiting in the wings to sell at these better prices. Then we've got our Noxium chart that has to recover a little bit, right, reaching 1500 ISK. 50% increase over the course of just a little bit over a month is a little bit too much for the market to bear sustainably, and so we have to come back down. But we're landing at, I'd say, 1300 or something like that. Yeah, 1330 for the sellers, 1300 for the buyers. Still very, very expensive Noxium. Obviously, if you are going to mine out in low sec, you'd rather grab some Noxium than Isogen at the moment. That should really be your focus. It's just that much better. But I think that dynamic should eventually drive Isogen to go through the reserves and go even higher, which could this is actually something that I'm noticing now, that this run up in Noxium is basically coming after a run up in Isogen, and so it is possible that some efforts in LOSEC start to move towards Isogen as well, which means less effort towards Noxium, which means these higher prices. So I would say, if it is correct that there are still these reserves that will eventually chew through in Isogen, this could mean not only higher prices for Isogen, but perhaps for Noxium as well on the longer term. In nullsec, I think we're pretty stable. I haven't really heard too much about a lot of destruction, and so Zydrine is just right around 1000 disk, actually going down that just a little bit. Yeah, 993 for the sellers, 926 for the buyers, but this is pretty much as stable a chart as you get around 1000 disk. And then we've got Megasite that is gone through 700, but I think sellers will be right on that mark. Yeah, 700 for the sellers, 660 for the buyers. And this is of course something that you should expect in EVE Online, especially when you've got stuff that's mostly sourced from nullsec. This is also a little bit of like cartel behavior, right? All this Megasite, all this Hydron has to be moved in from nullsec, and it's pretty easy then for them to say, well, selling for 700, that's what we're doing, that's the price, and then for Zydrine, sell at 1000, and then they're getting their price, and there's really not much anyone else can do about that when such big groups decide on prices of certain goods. Finally, we've got a Morphite that is well, still staying above 50,000 disks, so it's still quite expensive. 52 for the sellers and 49,000 for the buyers. Historically speaking, still super expensive, but at least a little bit more affordable on this 1 year chart, and could be in the exact same boat as Zydrine and Megasite, where basically the nullsec groups that are large enough to have significant quantities of Morphite are just not willing to sell below 50k. Volumes have gone up though on these lower prices, which I think speaks to my theory as to why Morphite, on the increased availability that happened here once and then as well in December with the patch, does have an impact that it lowers the price, and that is because Morphite is so expensive that you're always going to prioritize that, and so bringing all the extra Morphite to the market is something that groups are actively doing. Bringing all the extra Zydrine to the market, bringing all the extra Tritanium to the market, for instance, is stuff that's not really happening under the new mining changes, and as a result, yeah, Morphite is clearly going down in price. Pyrite apparently is oversupplied as well, but all the others actually have pretty high prices at the moment. Then we have the PI market coming in at 1705. I don't expect a lot of good news for PI, so here's the broadcast notes, flat at that really low price below 125. 1.2 to almost 1.2 million, so a little bit of demand. I do think that potentially for those larger cap ships, some of these advanced PI materials will see a little bit more structured demand, and so pretty narrow margins. But at the moment, we still basically don't know what CCP is planning, and so there's really little reason for anyone to drive the price up or anything like that. So unfortunately, I think that will be the story across the board. Construction blocks managed to get back to 8,000 disks, but you can see the response. We're already going back down towards 7k pretty quickly. 7,300 for the sellers, 6,900 for the buyers. Any opportunity that is created here by higher prices gets crushed very quickly by supply. Then we get consumer electronics is currently creating that opportunity, although that's relative. Above 6,000 disks is still not a great price. 6,500 for the sellers, 6,200 for the buyers. Honestly, just expect supply to crush us back below 6,000 disks pretty soon. Then we've got coolants staying above 10,000 disks, but you've got these wavy patterns. I do think that basically there is supply coming online for this as well. That helps keep prices in check. 10,500 to 10,000 ISK though is one of the best refined PI materials that you can make, and pretty easily, gas planets, and sell at the moment. And I've actually been just selling more of my coolants in a Mars space because that's where I've been producing mine. Then we get cryoprotectant solutions, still pretty expensive but starting to come back down, and so we know that this run up in the price was due to an event where blueprints for implants dropped. Pretty expensive implant, so here is that extra demand showing up, and yeah, this was a pretty easy 20+% price gain that could have been had with purchases for the entire year pretty much, where I kept mentioning, although it was not based on an event but on the assumption that CCP would eventually come out with more implants. So you know, the impact here, it's important to note that apparently events can create opportunities around implant related PI materials as well, like these cryoprotected solutions. At the moment we are going back down, but I think the chart is very nice and predictable. Once we are starting to buy well below 100,000 disc, you can basically prepare yourself again for another maybe implant related event or new implants being introduced by CCP. At the moment still selling for almost 115,000, so that still gives you that easy 20% profit on those best purchases. Enriched uranium seeing a little bit of pressure, but still at a reasonable price as well. Almost 10,000 disc for the sellers and 9,000 disc for the buyers. Fuel related stuff is still doing better. Integrity response drones, yeah, seeing a little bit of support at 1.5 million. It's 1.7 for the sellers, 1.4 for the buyers, and slightly more buyers, a little bit more structure in that demand showing up here than the amount of sellers. That does to me indicate that advanced is not gonna crash, but it's entirely dependent where it moves next on what CCP actually decides to do for capital ship production and things like that. Mechanical parts tied to fuels actually still high on the 1 year chart as well. 7,900 for the sellers to 7,500 for the buyers. Pretty narrow margin, decently strong demand. Then we've got our nanites flat at 5,000 disc. That's just not budging. 4,900 to 4,200, very, very cheap. Our nano factories, right, same story, did dip to 600,000 disc, but then manages to claw its way back above 700k, 770 for the seller, 711 for the buyers. But yeah, that's still, you know, at the lower edge of the range for nano factories. So this is just that same story I think that we can see here. There are enough industrialists out there and large groups that do want to make big ships, and so they're willing to, you know, keep a certain amount of demand ready for advanced PI materials, but it's not enough. It's just enough to keep us from crashing to 1 year low points, basically. Organic motor applicators, same story. Are we back above 700k? Yep, 750 to 690 for those buyers. Recursive computing modules, let's see if we can get the chart to show something. Yep, same story again, right? We did actually drop to a 1 year low point of 800,000 disc on this one, and we are starting to recover from this. 850 to 820, right? Buyers forced up above 800 again, or actually willing to move up above 800,000 here again, despite having successfully broken through that not that long ago. Robotics is flat at 65k, which is, you know, still not a great price, but also 64,150 for the sellers, 64,120 for the buyers, showing that the fuel-related PI materials do have that slight edge at the moment. Self-harmonizing power cores, again, getting back towards a 1.5 million and 127 million for the buyers. They're pretty careful. This does exactly make that same story. Serial conduits went below 900 and starts to move sideways here. So again, some demand is keeping us from crashing right back to even lower points. Yukomi superconductors, not much to say. 75,000 to 68,000, actually slightly better than the robotics. Although on the chart, of course, it's not the best sell opportunity. It's right down the middle. And then finally we get our wetware mainframes, which as well did not reach a 1 year low point. That would be 1.2 million and is bouncing back above 1.4 million. Yeah, 147 to 142, showing again that pickup in demand, or that demand does exist for advanced PI materials thanks to the industrial changes, but everyone is in a wait-and-see pattern for what CCP is planning next. Honestly, this entire market is so far, you know, running on that. We don't really know where to go because we don't know where the game's going. Next up, we've got advanced moon materials that's coming in at 2345. Let's take a look at these, and honestly, we're not expecting more. All right, this is interesting. Crystalline carbonite dropping down to less than 150, back at the range from about a year ago. 155 for the sellers, but 137 for the buyers. So this is a bit of a trend break for the entire year. We basically have the start of the year, then the April changes, so the industry changes with a lot of volatility, settling down at a nice margin, nothing too crazy, but quite noticeably above 150 to 200 ISK was the new range. And now here, which we'd already seen with Amar, we for the first time break back down and we're back at the same range we were about a year ago. Let's see if something like that is happening for Caldari as well. Titanium carbide, yep, actually very interesting. Also coming back down to 150, which is actually a 1-year low point for titanium carbide at the moment, 156 to 152. All right, interesting. I'm still not sure if we should be buying at this point, but I would say if you want to buy for the very long term, if you're willing to invest for a longer horizon, this could be interesting. Because my theory on this is basically we don't have enough consumption destruction happening in the game in Take-Two ships at the moment, and if a big Gnostic war happens, Take-Two fleets will be lost. That's when you potentially will see a lot more of these items being needed. So if you spot 1-year low points, perhaps buying some of that could make sense. Let's see what's happening with Minmatar related stuff. Fernite carbide, not exactly there, but also below 150. So really heading back towards that range from about a year ago. And this one again, right? April, even announcement starts to add in volatility. Then we settle nicely above 150. So we get our margin and it's able to stay there. But now here in January, we're starting to break down and we're starting to play again with the ranges from a year ago. Tungsten carbide for Amar actually did that a little bit earlier, but this is kind of confirming this. Look at that, we're basically right back on the low end of the range from a year ago. 140 for the sellers, 132 for the buyers. I'd say we could potentially buy lower if we can get close to 125, but this to me is very interesting. Potentially I'll be looking at the carbide-like materials for 1-year low points to maybe start investing a little bit, building up some reserves in case of a big war or maybe some changes too that could impact Take-Two. Next up, we've got our metamaterials. Let's see what's happening here. Here are photonic metamaterials, basically fully absorbing an unexpected volatile spike up to 20,000 ISK on a day, back down to 12.5, 12,200 for the sellers, 11,700 for the buyers. So basically maybe a little bit of overshooting, but we are right on back on the average range. Did take a little bit of time in order to fully absorb this, but we're right back where we've basically been for the whole year. Then we've got for Caldari, always have to look a little bit for those, but here are the non-linear metamaterials. Yeah, back at 20,000 ISK, 22 for this, 20,200 for the sellers, and 18,000 for the buyers. This is pretty much, as close to a flat chart as you can get. Not much to say. Then we've got for Minmatar, here is plasmonic metamaterials, right? Couple of spikes, tied to wars here and there. If Take-Two Minmatar ships are in the meta, which they have been for a pretty long time, I think, in the Imperium, then you do get a little bit of speculation on that. But overall, right, we start here, we end here, and we spend a lot of time right around that same range. So metamaterials, despite the fact that carbides are now dropping off and are actually reaching 1-year low points in, for instance, the Caldari version, metamaterials are just shrugging everything off and are one of the most stable materials that we've been able to find here so far. 17k for the sellers, 16k for the buyers. And then finally we've got Amar. Here is terahertz metamaterials. Yep, starts a little bit above 15k, ends a little bit below 15k. And we are at 14.6 for the sellers, 14,500, 400 for the buyers. So this, is bound to be like the lower end of the range. And very, very interesting to see this drop off all of a sudden in the carbide-like materials. Next up, we still have our other advanced materials. Here are fermionic condensates, also making it back where it was a year ago. But the difference, the difference you could say with the carbides is that these actually have that plateau of gains, of higher prices, and then these tend to have our 1-year low dips and our below average prices. So it's been a pretty rough year, I would say, for the other advanced boom materials. This is a nice recovery, but I don't expect this to continue. Basically, from here here, my expectation is this might just only go down on even more stability, considering what's happening with the carbides. Ferrogel has a little bit of volatility, makes its way back to 35k, but if we take that range here, then again we're recovering to a normal price, and we spent a lot of the last year below that, almost 36 for the sellers, 35,000 for the buyers. At least there's a little bit of volatility here. Then we get Fullerites, did have a nice April period, but then we're settling at 700 disk. Not much to say there again. Feels pretty low. Hypersynaptic fibers. Alright, on the 1 year chart doing quite decently, but staying below 10k I think is still not great. Nano transistors, again a little bit of volatility, recovering from that, but can't really say that this is a great price for nano transistors. 4,200 to 4,000 disk is not great. Phenolic composites also heading back basically to the low end. This one has a bit of a different chart, and we actually noticed that. I think the other one is ceramic fibers. These were two other advanced materials that did manage to get that premium as well after April volatility, but lost it a little bit sooner than the carbides basically, as it even went to a 1 year low point in November. But these basically, where that happened as well, these have now settled back to those price ranges. No, then it's pressurized oxidizers, actually going up in price all of a sudden. Interesting, our first move. So pressurized oxidizers and reinforced carbon fibers are new items that have come in with the industry changes, and here we basically have our first move up towards 25,000 disk, 23,000 for the sellers, not a lot of supply, and buyers are at 12,000. That's a pretty serious margin. So if you can find someone that is willing to sell it to you, then you have a pretty good deal. But our first tiny little wave really showing up here in pressurized oxidizers. Let's see if reinforced carbon fiber shows anything. No, that's still a little bit too early, too flat and stable at the moment. And then finally we get our ceramic fibers, landing on 300. Same story here, right? April, so we have speculation on industry changes and a little bit of volatility here. We do recover throughout the summer, but we managed a very nice premium. 400, 350 was pretty easy, but now at the tail end we're right back on that 300 disk range for ceramic fibers as well. So pretty interesting. I did not expect carbides to lose their margin, but all of them pretty much in unison are doing that. And then our metamaterials are basically super flat. That is something that probably helps or is part of the reason why Tech2 ships really don't have that much volatility. And then I would say that these metamaterials dropping right back to where they started off, it either opens up a bit more margin for speculation, that could mean more volatility in Tech2 ships, but honestly, if we just stop seeing volatility here, I think it's just going to add to the fact that there's not a lot of destruction of Tech2 ships. There's pretty stable production costs at that point, so don't expect too much volatility in Tech2. I hope I'm wrong, because we've been in this mode for quite a bit, but that's my read on all of this. Let's take a look then. Tech2 ships coming in at 32.30. There we go. Let's start here with the Basilisk, basically flat at a low point. So we're talking 185 million for the sellers to 175 million for the buyers. I would say if you haven't already, if you want like a really cheap Basilisk at the moment, you're definitely able to do that. 175 somewhere down here on the chart, that's definitely pretty low. But same warning, especially coming now from the advanced boom materials, you're buying low to hope for better times in the medium to long term, not in the short term. Honestly, I would say at this point I'm not expecting any sales to happen until maybe FanFest or something like that. There's gonna be exceptions. There are always exceptions to that rule, but that's really my personal horizon on that, right? I buy cheap Tech2 ships, and then I hope that when FanFest maybe CCP announces something that can create a little bit of volatility or something like that. But up in between now and then, at the moment, I would say I'm still in just buy as cheap as possible mode and look at them as medium to long-term investments. Here is the Cerberus slowly making its way back Was this tradable? Well, maybe if you bought below 200 million ISK, you're selling at 240 now. That's not that bad. Buyers at 211, they're forced up here a little bit as well. But obviously, we would love to see 280 historically, right? That was an easy spike to do for the Cerberus quite often. And so this, to me, it's nice, but it's still not that great. So basically, I wouldn't want to be buying Cerberus at the moment, but let's see how supply will react to these prices, and perhaps another even lower buy opportunity like with the Basilisk might be coming. Then we've got the Guardian, all right, making its way up well above 200 million ISK. So if you bought here, probably a 170-ish was easily possible. You are now selling at 213 million ISK. That's not bad. That's a trade. 186 for the buyer is still a pretty wide margin. But yeah, if you bought at these low points, you do have a sell opportunity all of a sudden in the Guardian. We haven't seen that in a while, so let's actually call that good news. Then we've got the Hound. The Hound had that spike. Let's see how it's recovered from that. It's unfortunately landing on 25 million, so it's not going to create your buy opportunity, which was down here, of course, probably close to 21 million. Currently selling for 26, buyers at 23. Yeah, that's a no. Right, we're in that in-between spot where we don't want to be, but again, this spike is good news. This increase in price is definitely pretty good news as well. We're making a high that we haven't seen in 5 months. The Cerberus, yeah, not yet, right? This one is still on that lower volatility trajectory. Then we get the Ichthyosa staying expensive at 650, 673 for the seller, 632 for the buyer, 650 on average. The good news here was as well that we do have these spikes, these high points going up, which to me, you know, that was one of those reasons why maybe we'll see more volatility. But yeah, advanced moon materials to me are maybe gonna snuff that out pretty quickly. Then we've got the Ishtar, did dip to a 1-year low point, easily purchased below 190, 199 now for the sellers and 186 million for the buyers. This is still quite acceptable if you want a Tech 2 investment, right? Again, not to sell tomorrow at a nice profit, but to hold on for a longer time. I would say buy an Ishtar below 190 million. You are buying below the entire chart. Do not, I would say, invest all your ISK right now, because as we've seen right here with the Ishtar, as we've seen with the Basilisk, another new low point is entirely possible in this market. Then we get the Manticore, does touch 30 million, which we haven't seen in 3-4 months. Higher volumes, interesting to see. It's not a breakout we would be hoping for, and there's still a couple for sale at 31 million in GTA itself, 26 for the buyers. Buyers are clearly forced up here, so you know, this type of availability, if that had created an opportunity up to 35 million, that would have been another very good sign. This is still another telltale sign that maybe volatility is brewing in the Tech 2 ship market, because we have not seen these prices above 30 million for the sellers in a couple of months. But it's still just quite anecdotal. Munin though, doing the same thing, again going up to 230 million in the week, recovering very quickly. We're already back at 194 and 188 for the buyers, but you know, this is a trend, the breaking of that downward trend in volatility. So very interesting. I did not expect that. Reading advanced movements, I was like, all right, volatility is gonna get killed. But we've got a lot of these that are actually showing new highs all of a sudden, after declining in highs for 10 months at this point. Then we've got the Nemesis. That one is still on the downside, but this does create, in my opinion, another buy opportunity. If I look at the chart here, yeah, you're buying very close to 20 million, 22.4 for the buyers. Supply is still high enough. So just like with the Ishtar, perhaps trying to buy a Nemesis as close as possible to 20 million ISK, that's down here on the chart, can be a pretty good idea. Then we've got the Oneros, also pretty low. Fortunately, today's data points are already back up. But I think you could have, right, these last couple of months, if you absolutely want an Oneros, keep in mind daily volumes are pretty bad, then you should have been able to grab one, I would say very close, if not below 160, yeah, below 160 million. And you can still do so right now. Considering the move of the chart, though, it's going to be a little bit harder to actually grab it. But you can still buy very cheap Oneros. Then we get the Panther, stabilizing in price, makes sense considering the advanced movements. above 1.2 billion for the sellers, almost 1.2 for the buyers. The purifier, yeah, not a 1 year low point, but let's see how much below 22 the buyers are. Yeah, below 22 million, sellers at 24 million. Again, we are basically in a spot here, 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 and here, which is pretty much since the summer, where I've been saying I'm trying to buy as low as possible. Buying a purifier now, to me, does make sense. Then we get the scimitar, not a 1 year low point, and still not building on volatility. So that's the bad news on that one. We're talking below 190 for the sellers, 181 for the buyers. Yeah, maybe you can still buy if you absolutely still want a scimitar, but probably just a little bit too late. Better hope for another dip. The Widow, all right, making its way to 1.4 billion almost for the sellers, showing actually expensive battleships at the moment. And then finally the Zealot. The Zealot did have a little bit of volatility, and the first dip and rise, that was like the very first one where is there some volatility brewing back in the market? The others didn't really follow suit, but the real question is, can we duplicate this again? Can this Zealot market make a real dip to, let's say, buy close to 180? Where are we buying at the moment? Below 180. That is definitely still possible, but will the spikes then be able to again get towards 230? If that's possible, then we are starting to see a little bit more volatility. It might not work out, but some of the others are starting to make those first little waves here as well. So it is interesting. We'll keep a close eye on it. But again, my money is on, no, just keep buying low and wait for potentially FanFest or something like that. Next up, the Tech 3 ship market coming in at 40.40. There we go, making good time today. And yeah, we discussed that one last week as well, very specifically looking at the Tech 3 ships and the modules for Tech 3 cruisers. So if you want to watch that and you haven't already, you can definitely take a look at last week's video for Eve as well. But let's take a look here. Here's the Confessor slowly making its way back to 50 million ISK. Sellers are at 49 now, buyers at 44, and availability, well, there's a little bit less supply, which is quite normal in the last 24 hours, for instance, to drive these prices up. That was because the Hecate had done a crazy spike up to 70 million. That is being plugged, so we should see a lot of supply come in here, back down to 60 million, 54 for the buyers, and finally we got a normal response. Look at that. This is the last 24 hours. Right? What are you going to make? What are you going to bring to the market at the moment? Obviously, it's Hecate at 70 to 60 million for the sell prices, and that is giving the Confessor some breathing room. The Jackdaw is all right, unexpectedly moving to a 1 year high point here as well. Then 63 million now for the sellers, 56 million for the buyers. This is already taking in all of the supply as well, more than a full page in the last 24 hours to try and plug that gap. This honestly should just give the Confessor even more room to go back up. So if you manage to buy this dip down here close to 40 million ISK, you're already looking pretty good at 48 million. That's not so, or 49 almost actually. But considering what's happening here and what's happening here, especially with all of these supply numbers, I think you can just wait and probably try to sell at more than 50 million as well. And that should mean yeah, no, I thought this would mean that maybe this Vapel is starting to move up towards that 50 million as well. It's just not popular enough. 47 for the sellers, 43 for the buyers, and still almost half a page, 60, 70, maybe even more Vapels being brought in the last 24 hours, despite all of this action. It really does show that it's not, as closely knit a tactical destroyer market as what it was before. It's a lot harder now to say, yeah, we've got the Hecate. Look at what's happening here. All of that supply is drawn in. We get the same thing happening now in the Jackdaw. And honestly, I would expect this Vapel to go back up. Logically, or a year ago, I would have said this Vapel is definitely going to go back up. But now I'm like, I don't know. It's not a sure bet at this point anymore. Really, the confessor right now is moving, correctly, you could say, on all of this action, but then the Zwepel just not. So not really sure what to do with all of this, but we'll see. We'll just keep an eye on it. Then we've got the cruisers. Here is the Legion moving in a 180 to 200 million range, if I'm not mistaken. 200 for the sellers, 186 for the buyers. Basically, there's more usage, there is slightly more volumes on this one, and just had a nice spike due to the event, really favoring the Legion as the great ship in order to run it effectively. And so as a result, I do feel like it's a little bit less prone to manipulation, this Tech 3 cruiser market, and this is a good margin with pretty predictable low points. So if you see this, if we can work our way back down and you see this touch 180, that's like, all right, maybe buy a Legion hull and then just wait for your sell opportunity at 200 million. Becomes quite predictable, becomes quite doable, and considering that we've been doing this pretty well, pretty nicely since the change to the ship where you don't lose skill points anymore for getting blown up in a Tech 3 cruiser, I think it makes sense that you can basically include Tech 3 cruisers in your trading strategy. The Loki, for instance, is very, very stable at 200 million ISK. Just below that for the sellers, 184 for the buyers. So if you see some real dips here, then you can try to grab a cheap one, and you'll have a pretty decent opportunity to actually sell it at a better price. The Proteus is still the least popular one, so here I would honestly wait, for instance, for the chart to go or touch at least the 170 million mark. But again, a 200 here, almost a 200 here. You've got a more 200 for the sellers, 182 for the buyers. You've got a more predictable, logical wave that doesn't, feel like it's potentially manipulated to hell and back. And then the Tengu, also way more stable, 200 at a high point. You'll have a harder time because it is such a popular ship here, but if you can buy well below 190, which at the moment you can already buy below 190, then you can spot low prices, you can spot cheap Tech 3 ships, and you've got a way more sustained period where they are more expensive. I think just because they're used more at this point. So that's interesting. This Tech 3 ship market has definitely changed a lot, and I would hesitate a lot less to dive in on a lower chart for some of these Tech 3 cruisers at this point. And then finally, for the extra product this week, I chose the faction frigates. It was a pretty interesting week in the faction cruisers last week. Very expensive pirate ships, of course, but functioning differences between the navy factions. So let's see what the frigates are like. Coming in at 4630. Like that. So this is going to be frigates, pirate factions first. And let's see if the Astero is going for a 1 year high point. Definitely expensive. 130 million for the sellers, 114 million for the buyers, and you've got a volume spike here as well. Main reason, of course, the event. If you want very fast and easy relic analyzers, then you've got the Astero. Lots of people, I think Alpha clones can fly this one as well, and for Omegas it's got covered up capabilities. So overall, definitely I think if you want to quickly and effectively run these relic sites, the Astero is going to be the ship of choice. So that's quite normal that we have higher volumes and a 1 year high point. Already 100 million for the last 4 or 5 months is pretty expensive. Then we've got the Crewer currently selling for 67 million, buyers coming at 63 million, very expensive again. So another one of these clear casualties with the industry changes where it's become a lot more expensive. Daredevil as well actually went up above 100 million not that long ago, currently selling, there's one being sold at 91 million for the buyers. I think that'll just be the pattern. Here's the Dramiel above 70 million. Then we get the Garmer, that's not going to be pretty. 1 year high point here as well, going above 90 million, 98 million for the sellers, 85 for the buyers. The Raiju is a tournament ship, so that one will not be sold that easily. Then we get the Succubus, 90 million pretty much as well. Almost. so very expensive. And then the worm should be pretty popular for the event as well. Yeah, definitely a very capable PvE platform. You might even want to risk a worm for the combat parts, I'm gonna assume here. Currently going for above 100 million, 105 for the sellers, 95 for the buyers. And I think the worm is also very popular for cooperative abyssal content, if that's what you're into. But pirate faction ships, just like pirate faction cruisers, very expensive. Basically almost 100 million is for one of these individual ships, which is still, you know, good news from the perspective that if you're doing high-sec exploration like myself, you can, for instance, in the Mars space, if you're doing Sancha sites, you can have a succubus BPC drop, although the production cost is probably up as well. Let's see if I can take a look at that. Can I do this one? View in industry. View in industry. There we go. Can't I see what? Yeah, it's that new stuff that's the problem, basically. Yeah, but that's still reasonable, right? 31 million for an 85 million. You've got a pretty nice margin between these. Now let's take a look at the Navy faction frigates. Next here is the Caldari Navy Hookbill. Look at that difference in range all of a sudden. 12.5 million for the sellers, 12 million for the buyers. I would say Caldari is pretty cheap at the moment. And then we get the other side of the faction warfare coin. Here is the Federation Navy Comet, expensive at the moment at 20 million, 17.4 for the sellers. Very, very nice to see this work here as well. Imperium Navy Slicer, so that's a Mar, is expensive. And then Republic Fleet at 15 million. Republic Fleet Firetail, actually expensive as well at 14 million. Don't have that good an explanation. Is there a gap between sellers and buyers? 12 million, a little bit of a gap here. But Republic Fleet Firetail is still expensive. Skybreaker is not that expensive. Although 81 million is, of course, on the 1 year chart, it's not that expensive compared to the faction warfare related ones. It is expensive. Crucifier Navy issue coming down a little bit from a high point of 15 million. And then let's take a look at the Griffin for Caldari. Is inexpensive, yeah, 12.5, 15 for the sellers, but buying below 12 million. Then the Maulus fleet issue is very expensive, 32 million for the sellers, 23.5. And then the Vigil fleet issue, yeah, somewhat in the middle. So for this one, very interesting. Definitely we're seeing that mechanic work well between Caldari and Gallente, with Caldari being very inexpensive, Gallente being very expensive. So, you know, if you happen to still have some Caldari loyalty points, Gallente loyalty points, you know, lying around, trying to grab a couple of Mauluses, bring those to the market, selling them makes sense. And if you want that investment on potentially, of course, the turnout, because the players still have to do it, but Gallente pushing back against Caldari, then buying some of these Navy faction Caldari ships is your opportunity to do so. There seems to be a little bit less of a move like that between Amar and Minmatar here, which is unfortunate. But at least you do have something where you can buy on the cheap, and if the Caldari get pushed back, making their loyalty points more expensive, you're gonna have a profit, which is of course why I've always liked looking at these faction items. But the ranges, of course, between pirate faction and navy faction has just gone completely bonkers because of the industry changes. That's just part of the reality as well. And that's then going to be it for this Eve Talk, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time.